Hi, everyone. It's Colleen, the Preparedness Pro for your Preparedness Pro pop-in. You try to say that 3 times real fast. All right, let me get Instagram on board here. Make sure I've done that right. Ta-da, did it right. Yes, hello, Instagram folks. All right, so we've got something serious to talk about today. Sorry, I know you just love that. And you're like, well, where's the peaceful preparedness? And I just want you to know that I believe 100% in peaceful prepared. I can say it too. Peaceful preparedness. But I don't think that comes from keeping our head in the sand. I think it comes from being well informed, whether that's how to preserve food or well informed as to what we need to be prepared for. So I want to share something that I don't think is getting enough news coverage by any stretch of the imagination. And most of us don't watch the news anymore because we don't really feel like it can be trusted. I had to do a lot of research over the last several days to get the real scoop, not just on what was published, but I had to research actual, what would you call them, subject expert pages and look at various reports. I've got a couple of the reports here for you to look at that so that you can see for yourself what I was looking at. It's very interesting. So brace yourself, put your seatbelts on today. It's going to be a bumpy ride. So some of you may have heard about a looming strike amongst the ILA. For those of you who don't know, I just want to make sure I've got a lot of notes on this because I didn't want to miss anything. So the ILA is the International Longshoremen Association, and those are the maritime workers at the ports from the top to the bottom of the country. And they are going on strike on, well, technically the strike would go into effect on October 1st, but they're going on strike September 30th. So that's just coming Monday. This has been in the works for some time now. This has been a concern since they've been preparing for it since July. And I'll give you evidence of this as we go on. But it's just not being covered on the news. And what is being covered on the news makes me ill because they're treating it as if this strike is just about stuff for Christmas and that it won't impact anyone because the stuff for Christmas was sent early. And so the retailers will be okay on their Christmas sales, which, don't get me wrong, that's important because for a lot of retails, that's half of their sales happen from Black Friday on. And that's how it came to be called Black Friday, is because they're no longer in the red. Black Friday is the day that they finally get out of the red on their sales. So that's how that term Black Friday came about. So I know that that's a big deal for retail. We don't want all the retail stores to collapse because of this strike, but they are not positioning it at all for the crises that I believe that it truly is. I'm not trying to say the sky is falling in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going to give you the information and you can decide. I'm just really shocked at what they're not saying. And yet you do a little digging, you can see for yourself what this means. Experts in the field of shipping have come out in print and called this strike the makings of, quote, a cataclysmic event. That's why I called this pop-in today a cataclysmic disaster. So October 1st. Now the strike will impact the ports of the Atlantic, Gulf Coast, Great Lakes, major U.S. rivers, Puerto Rico, Eastern Canada, and the Bahamas. And the odds are not looking good on preventing tens of thousands of International Longshoremen Association maritime workers at the ports from going on strike. That's a crucial date. That's September 30th, when a 6-year master contract between the ILA, which is the largest union of maritime workers in North America, and the United States Maritime Alliance, covering the East and Gulf ports, is due to expire. Now, it's kind of interesting. They keep saying the East and Gulf ports, but we still have the West port. Oh my gosh. Clearly, they've never been in a traffic jam in their life. We're going to talk about that, what that actually means. But The contract includes 6 of the 10 busiest U.S. ports, and they handle more than 13 million containers annually. Now, we'll put that in perspective of what that 13 million containers actually means to you and me. But there's a total of 3 dozen ports that are covered. So who all is involved? Well, you have the ILA, that's the largest union, maritime workers. That represents upwards of 85,000 longshoremen. They are striking for less automation, claiming that it's stealing jobs and pay raises. In fact, there was one study at one port, I think it was back in 2017, when they installed a automated crane. And the report said just that automated crane stole 572 longshoremen jobs. So they're pretty up in arms about this. They want some substantial pay raises. I have it in my notes. It's not right here in front of me, but I think we're talking a 77% pay raise. So it's big. It's to keep in step, as they say, with real inflation. I thought that was interesting. The union president said real inflation. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, so let's look and see what could happen on a broad view here. If this is a big, big if the strike were resolved within a few weeks, and I'll tell you why that's not likely. But if it was, we, the people, probably wouldn't notice any major shortages of retail goods. And I think it's funny because the news article that did come out, it was NBC that came out with it, is just focusing on retail goods. Like we're talking televisions and toys. No, this is much more significant than television and toys. If a strike persists for more than a month, then it would likely cause a shortage of some consumer products. Although, like I said, most holiday retail goods, they've already arrived from overseas. So, getting your Tickle Me Elmo of the year, whatever that toy is for this year, should not be a problem. But a prolonged strike would most certainly hurt the U.S. economy. Even a brief strike would cause disruptions. You're going to have heavier vehicular traffic that would be likely at the key points around the country as cargo gets diverted to the West Coast. So think about that for a second. If part of the solution is, well, we can't go to the ports, the dozen ports on the east side, the east and the Gulf, we're going to divert to the west. There's a logistical problem there. You've got to have warehouses set up for that. You've got to have more lanes for trucks to come in and take those shipments. There aren't more lanes for trucks to come in. There aren't more warehouses. But you're going to have a whole lot of trucks swooping into the western side of the United States to try to take these additional shipments. Now, some shipping companies have their own ports, and that's great. They'll move to the front of the line. They will be caught up in the traffic jam. So they still will be impacted to some extent, but not as badly as those who aren't. You will have a lot of companies that need to ship their goods to the U.S. They've got to make payroll too. And they're going to go with the smaller shipping companies that are more expensive because they're smaller, because they can't get as much on a boat. So that's going to be passed on to you. Well, and me too. Just let you know, me too. If that strike were to extend beyond a month, you're going to have a bigger effect than what they're trying to sell it. Some manufacturers could run short on parts, notably in the automobile and the pharmaceutical. We'll talk about that a little bit more. They don't stock large parts inventory. You don't have pieces of a Ford F-150 sitting in a warehouse. The automobile industry, the manufacturing industry operates in a just-in-time system, just like our food system does. So your exports of autos and other goods that move through the East Coast will be affected, even if it's just a few weeks of a strike. So let's say, okay, just for giggles and kicks, do we really think the strike is going to happen? I'll give you the facts. You can decide. Apparently the rhetoric with the ILA is at a level that has not been seen before, according to those who are trying to negotiate. A lot of analysts say that the union's initial demands included a 77% pay raise, there's that note there, over the course of a 6-year contract. That's a heavy pay raise. That should tell you a little bit about where inflation is headed, folks, because that's going to be passed on to we the people. Just FYI, we're already feeling it. The union president said that sizable pay raises are going to make up for the inflation spike over the past few years. What inflation spike? I thought inflation's come down. I'm so confused. Huh. Anyway, Daggett is his name, the union president, and he said that it would give workers a share, get this, a share of the billions that the companies have earned, especially during the pandemic. So apparently there were billions of dollars earned during the pandemic. No crises shall go to waste, right? Copenhagen-based Maersk, among the world's largest container shipping companies, made more than $50 billion in profits over the past 4 years alone. So they're a little bit ticked off about that. It's not just oil companies that are making money hand over fist. I don't think profit's a bad word. I think if you do a good job, you should make a profit. But the longshoremen are saying, hey, you're trying to steal our jobs. At least give us early retirement options. At least give us the opportunity to train us so that we could do another job. There's a lot of moving parts to their negotiations. So the union and the United States Maritime Alliance, get this, they haven't met to negotiate since June. Yeah, I think they're just going to decide to wake up on September 29th and say, you know what? Let's negotiate. Let's get together. Let's be friends. Let's negotiate and hash this out, because we haven't been able to do it since June. So the union said it suspended national talks to first complete local port agreements, but there's been no further national contract talks that have been scheduled at all. The union president is very firm. He warned earlier this month that the longshoremen stood ready to strike once their contracts expired. He said that they are very far apart, not even close, not nitpicking on a few items and ready to iron it out. There's not just one issue that's holding them up. No, they are very far apart. He says, quote, mark my words, we'll shut them down October 1st if we don't get the kind of wages we deserve. Yeah, I'm sure they're going to settle within the next week. The ILA is negotiating on behalf of about 45,000 dock workers and has warned its members that they are prepared to throw down tools if they can't get a new agreement, a new contract in place by October 1st. Another statement was made by the union president. He says the sleeping giant is ready to roar on Tuesday, October 1st, if a new master contract agreement is not in place. Like I said, the rhetoric is obviously very loud in this case. He says, my members have been preparing for over a year for that possibility of a strike. And that's indicative of the fact that so much preparation has been done even since as early as July. Did I say July? I meant that they've been preparing for over a year for that possibility of a strike. Sorry. The union is arguing for continued protections against that automation, like I mentioned before, and new technologies in its terminals. And notice that in the last 3 years, wages have failed to keep pace with inflation. That, of course, doesn't exist. So I don't know what they're complaining about. So, all right. So let's talk about the ripple effect as they're sharing it. Okay. This is pieces that I got here and there from industry reports, and also from what little bit of news that there was out there. The little bit of news that there was out there is really vague. I don't know if it's because they don't want people to panic, and I certainly don't want people to panic. I think maybe they're just too foolish to think that this is significant. I think they hear a strike and they're like, yeah, another strike. And they're just so comfy, cozy in their New York apartments, when they're not broadcasting the news, that they just don't think that this is significant. I don't know. That's me being very judgmental. I probably should stop that. But all right. So a major port strike could see retailers switch to, now you've got expensive air transportation. Yeah, that's going to be expensive. And again, guess who pays for that? So we're going to wonder why bananas now are $1.39 a pound. That's what we're talking about here, folks. And I'll explain why bananas will be impacted. The ILA has threatened to take strike action if it's not agreed. And now retailers are bracing for the shutdown because they're in the midst of preparing for the holiday season, which is their most critical 3-month period. And like I said, for some of them, not only is it half of their annual sales, but they start bringing in so much of their goods for their first quarter as well. So this quarter is important to them, big time. It's going to determine their stock prices in some cases as to how their first quarter looks. Well, if they don't have the product to sell, then their stock prices are going to tank. And if their stock prices tanks, then retirement accounts get hit. So think about that. The CEO of the retail industry's largest trade body, which is the National Retail Federation, called for both parties to negotiate a settlement. Like that's going to have any effect. But he did say the threat of a strike during the peak shipping season has many retailers already implementing costly mitigation strategies. Again, who pays for that? We do. I don't think we're going to see any 249 TVs this year, folks. He says it's at a time when inflation is on the downward trend. I love it when they say that. A strike or other disruption would significantly impact retailers, consumers, and the economy. And then he begs the administration to help out. He says the administration needs to offer any and all support to get the parties back to the table to negotiate a new deal. Well, here's the problem. The administration doesn't have their hat to hang on anything. There's not one thing that's needs their help. There's not one thing that they can do to help this situation. They are literally helpless, unless there's one little caveat. I just don't think that our administration has the spine to do it. And I'm not really in favor of government interference and things like this anyway. I think if the workers aren't being treated well, they need to be treated well, but I'm not there. I don't know. I couldn't get that kind of information. The Retail Industry Leaders Association had the same kind of sentiment as that other statement. They talking about the importance of keeping these ports operational could not be overstated, they said, especially as the peak holiday season approaches. Again, they're making this about stuff. It's so much more important than stuff, folks. Wait until I'm done with this. Your head will spin. They say a disruption of cargo movements would have a profound consequence for retailers, manufacturers, and consumers across the country. Okay, we get that. But with the strike looking inevitable, your retailers really are going to be hit the busiest time of the year. They have been preparing for months, though. Like I said, so much of the stuff is already over here. So like I said, your Tickle Me Elmo of the year is not going to be a problem. But they had a really busy summer, suggesting that the retailers were trying to get ahead of the curve and also mitigating any disruption in supply chain around the Middle East as well. They could choose to redirect imports to Canadian ports, but you still have a problem with the East Canadian port because that's under the contract as well. Several of those are facing the possibility of industrial action or switch to air transport, which again is much more expensive. Now, so let's talk about the not so fluffy stuff of the ripple effect. So brace yourself, because here's where it gets really sticky. East and Gulf Coast ports account for half, it's actually over half, of total U.S. imports measured in cargo tons. Now, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. That's how they communicate in the cargo world, I learned through my research. It's an exact unit of measurement used to determine the cargo capacity for container ships and terminals. So just think tons and you're fine. But during the first 7 months of 2024, East and Gulf Coast handled 50.8% of total measurements in TEUs through the country's top 10 ports. But the share for the East and Gulf Coast port was higher in January and July of 2023, and they're expecting that's going to be higher as well, with some panic because of the year-on-year decline that they are attributing to the shippers preparing for a strike. That's why they think it was higher, is okay, we got to get more stuff over there because of the strike. But the impact of a coast-wide strike across all your East and your Gulf ports would be pronounced even if that was short-lived, even if it really was only 50% of all of our shipping that comes into the U.S. Those U.S. ports are linked to trade lanes representing 16.2% of worldwide TEU miles. Now, that may not sound like a really big number, but think about it. The immediate effect would be as if that much capacity was removed. And that's twice as much capacity as removed due to longer voyages resulting from the Red Sea situation. So we're already seeing problems because of the Red Sea situation. Any shifting to West Coast ports representing 11.8% of TEU miles, or non-US North American ports representing 10.4% of TEU miles, will overwhelm those ports and cause congestion. Congestion like you have never seen before. Forget the pandemic. You have never seen problems like this before. An expert specifically said, I'm going to quote him, the impact of such a strike of any duration would quickly spread across all container systems to be cataclysmic to maritime supply chains worldwide. And I will explain why it's worldwide, not just US issue. Customers who move 3.2 billion per day of goods and containers across the East and Gulf Coast ports and 5.6 billion per day across all US ports would feel the largest impact. So in other words, those customers that do the most volume are going to feel the most impact. Well, guess what? We're talking about those customers that do the most volume. We're talking about Asia, Europe, and Latin America. McCown, what's his first name? Oh, I don't know, but he's really good with these reports. I found a library of reports on his site. That's all he does is reports. He reported on U.S. importers that even the heavily front-loaded shipments in preparation for the strike, he says, I have not seen enough data to indicate that inventory levels have been built up enough where customers can absorb any strike without meaningful economic pain. In other words, yes, there was some anticipation of the strike, but it hasn't been good enough to mitigate any pain that we're going to feel. So don't get complacent. He also warned on another quote I have him on, clearly the follow-on impacts of any such strike, including domestic production lines shutting down, will just grow exponentially the longer it lasts. I don't see it in front of me. Maybe it's right here and I'm going to get to it and I'm just getting antsy, but something like for every day that the strike goes on, it takes 4 to 6 days of backlog to catch up. So imagine if the strike goes on for a month, what we're looking at. That's a long time. And you don't even know what the whole repercussions are yet. We haven't gotten there yet. Another important data that I found was compiled by the U.S. Census Bureau using customs declarations on tons and containerized imports. They show a higher share of U.S. total imports for the East and Gulf Coast of 63.9% January through July. And they showed 66.6% January through July of last year. So that's a pretty solid number that we're seeing. We can expect that number to hold true through the second half as well of what kind of goods need to get here for the just-in-time system, regardless of the strike. So if we divert all of those items to the West Coast, it would have, and this is a quote from an expert, and then I'm going to tell you what they're not telling us. A West Coast shutdown would have an overwhelmingly impacted U.S. imports from Asia, but not other source regions. In contrast, a shutdown of East and Gulf Coast ports will not only impact Asian cargoes, it will cripple U.S. imports from Europe and Latin America, with shippers having few options to reroute. So let's think on that for a minute. Yikes. Not fun. If you have any questions or comments as we're going on, just feel free to pipe up. If you've enjoyed any of the videos that I've done, please make sure that you subscribe and that you like the video and that you share it. That keeps me going, keeps me doing these for you. But let's get to the part that they're not sharing with us, because that's pretty significant in my opinion. So the United States imports a variety of foods from Asia, including fish and seafood, large amount with most of it being farm raised, fruits and vegetables. As you well know, they don't all come from Mexico. Fruit juices, including apple juice, tree nuts, salad and cooking oils, snack foods, spices, and tea. About 41% of this import value was from fish and seafood, most of it farm raised. The rest are like juices and pickled, dried, and canned vegetables and fruit. That accounted for another 25%. So Asia being our largest importer, and their 25% of what they're importing would be impacted. And that's juices, pickled, dried, and canned vegetables and fruit. Ouch, that's going to leave a mark. Canada and European Union are the two largest suppliers of U.S. agricultural imports. The EU, United States, most traded goods. Top 3 exported products to the United States in 2023 was the same as in 2022. They were medical and pharmaceutical products. Motor cars and motor vehicles and medicaments is what they called them. Top 3 goods that the EU exports to the U.S. So you've got pharmaceutical products, medicines, motor cars, and motor vehicles. Do you remember during COVID how long people had to wait just to get a car, just to get parts for their car? That was nowhere near as cataclysmic as this is. In the first 7 months of this year, 52% of the cargo ton imports handled at East and Gulf Coast arrived from Asia, 27% from Europe, and 21% from Latin America. I'm going to show you a graph here. Let's see. We'll do this. Nope. I want it bigger. I want it mo bigger. There we go. Can you see this? This is showing, this is Asia. Red is the Asia. Europe is the green, and Latin America is the other. This is how much the East Gulf Coast imports came in by region. Pretty significant. Now this is showing you the share of the total U.S. imports by region. See that? This is all right here. Then you've got Europe, Latin America, Asia. Significant. That's very significant. Okay, so you're all happy now, aren't you? Sorry, guys. Sorry. Okay. The strike scenario is obviously going to be more acute for U.S. imports from Europe. East and Gulf Coast ports accounted for 90% of cargo tons from Europe imported to the U.S. in January through July. So rerouting options for them are extremely constrained, largely limited to Eastern Canada. And like I said, Eastern Canada is going to have some problems too. The U.S. East and Gulf Coast import mix from Europe is much different than from Asia. U.S. imports from Europe are less manufactured goods centric than those from Asia. Instead, they're dominated by building supplies like plaster and ceramic tiles, stone and cement, and food and beverages, led by wine and beer, by the way. Strike scenario for imports from Latin America is almost as dire as it is for Europe. The Census Bureau data shows that 83% of U.S. cargo tons imported from non-Asian and non-European countries, which is primarily your Latin America, year to date entered the country via where? Yeah, that would be your East and Gulf Coast ports. So one of the experts said, bananas. There are a lot of bananas coming through these ports. And he said they're the second largest category of cargo imports measured in tons to the East and Gulf ports year to date. Produce like bananas would face a great difficulty in the event of a strike, given that, these cargoes have time constraints. With bananas having a storage life for around 4 weeks, that's all they've got. So get your bananas now, folks. If your bananas have gone up in price, now you know why. They're anticipating this. They do that just like the gas does. The gas doesn't go up in price because that's what they paid for it. The gas prices go up because of what they anticipate. So here's one option for shipments from the West Coast of South America. It could ship to Los Angeles or Long Beach and then come over the country by truck. But that would have some really interesting ultra long haul refrigerated implications. From January to July, nearly 7 million containers came into the East and Gulf ports. That doesn't even represent 50% of all the containers for the year, because there's always a surge at the end of the year. But also keep in mind that whatever doesn't come in means that empty containers don't go out. And that clogs the entire system that much more. It exacerbates it. Half come in from Asia. 30% from Europe, 20% from Latin America. I can't stress that enough. So changing the shipments from the East Gulf Coast to the West Coast really isn't an option, in my opinion. It'll be worse than the shipping crisis that we saw before. Because like I said, there's logistical. You got to set up the warehouses. The rail systems and the railroads can't handle this out of the West Coast. And just picture, can you imagine the traffic of what that would look like with all those trucks now on the West Coast instead of scattered between the East and West Coast? Now, here's why I say this isn't just an American thing. The Europe piece is really important because you remember you have the Houthi that have blocked the Red Sea. So now we have large container ships that are taking the long, I know how to spell it, I just can't say it, circuitous route. They're going around. Africa, that's easier to say. About 30% of that cargo is going to go from Asia to Europe, and it gets transloaded from Europe and then put on other ships and then shipped to the US. So that's not going to happen. So then it's going to pile up in the terminals in Europe. See, this isn't just an American problem. This is a global problem. Like I said, they've been preparing for this since July. And the reason why I say that is because in July, the LA port had a 116-year record-breaking month with a 37% increase over the previous year. 37%. And it's now at least 18% ahead of its 2023 pace with the holiday items that have been sent over earlier in anticipation of the strike. That's just one port. Long Beach had a 34% increase. Like I said, it's not an American problem. It's a global problem. And you're going to see why as you see this big picture. Manufacturing can't front load orders. They're still operating in that just-in-time framework. We can't front load groceries. People operate in the expiration date mentality. And in cases of bananas and strawberries and things like that, you have expiration date issues. We live in a just-in-time food system as well. You have remember the Ever Given? When it got stuck in the Suez for 6 days, that caused months of issues. And now with the Houthi situation in the Red Sea, that's making an impact now. Okay, so here's the question. Can anything be done to avoid it? Well, that requires a spine on several people's parts, and I think we're in short supply of spines nowadays in the U.S. Yes, I said that. I'm sorry. It's true. The administration can't legally impose a contract on the dock workers before strike. And I don't think they should. I think the bumbling idiots should just stay out of it. But Still, if a strike were deemed to endanger national health or safety, which could be an issue with Europe being impacted so precariously, the president could, under the Taft-Hartley Act, seek a court order for an 80-day cooling off period. But like I said, they haven't even negotiated, come to the table since July. That could suspend the strike, but only for 80 days. And Biden's already said he doesn't intend to step in to head off a walkout. He says, we've never invoked Taft-Hartley to break a strike, and we're not considering doing so now. That's fine. I wouldn't expect anything different. They say we encourage all parties to remain at the bargaining table and negotiate in good faith. I mean, that's like a whack with a wet noodle. I mean, they could have at least said we strongly encourage all parties to remain. Anyway, in June, the NRF and a coalition of 158 states and federal trade associations asked Biden administration to help the two parties return. I'm going to say this: Biden's not a negotiator. We had a president who was a really good negotiator, and I wish that he was sitting there right now, because I think he could actually see his way to negotiate this and make something happen. And that doesn't make me one party or the other, but it does make me value negotiating skills. And I definitely value that man's negotiating skills. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So just FYI, presidents have the disputes, or not the disputes. That's what's going on, the disputes. They have the authority to intervene in labor disputes that are deemed to pose a threat to national security. So during which the workers would return to work while negotiations continue. But like I said, the negotiations haven't been continuing. And Biden says he's not going to play. He's not going to use that authority. And frankly, I'm glad. I just think that private business entities should work out their private business entity business. I just think it would be really helpful to have a master negotiator in there and who's looking out for the best interest of America. I feel like we don't have anybody in there who's looking out for the best interest of America. I feel like it's Americans are going to suffer because of this. Tough. We want our pay raise, and we're not going to come to the negotiating table. And then you have the other side saying, oh, Americans are going to suffer because of this. Tough. We're not going to give you a pay raise. So that's what we've got going on. Any questions? And that is that. Let's see. How long did I take to go over that? Ooh, 37 minutes. Sorry, this was a longer one. All right. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But it should tell you, this does not mean go and spend your 401k at the grocery store. This means that if you were waffling on something, honey, I wonder if we should get some more rice. Maybe we should. I don't know. Let's see. Maybe next month we'll get some more rice. I'd say get some more rice this month. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't mean you should panic, because that doesn't do anybody any good, ever. Never in the history of the earth has panicking done anyone any good. All right. So I hope that you can take this information, digest it, find out peacefully what your path is, do a little conversation with the Lord and say, okay, here's the information that Kelleen gave us. How should we respond? Not react, respond. And then go from there. All right. Take care, everyone. May you still have peace in your preparedness. I mean that. Bye-bye.